So, The Legend of Zelda came out 37 years ago in 1986. As if its release back in 1986, it was, to put it lightly, very well received. It sold about 6 million units. Bear in mind, this was in the 80s video game market, not the 2020s video game market. It was one of the primary titles of the Nintendo Entertainment System, and like one of the flagship titles. And it spawned a whole series of sequels that's going to this day. In fact, many right now are currently looking forward to the release of Tears of the Kingdom in, like, what, 3 months' time? What's it? Less than 3 months from now. Hell yeah. Anyway, it was very well received back in the day, but as the years wore on, particularly as the internet developed more and more, going into the early 2010s, more and more critics of the game gradually amassed, saying various things about it, from complaining that it's too cryptic, to complaining that it's too difficult, to just calling it just old. And so in this video, in this video, I'm going to give my opinions on the game as someone born a whole 20 years after it released. I did not play it when I was a little kid by any means. I played it when okay, full disclaimer, I played this game when I was 12 years old through Nintendo Switch Online. That's my experience of the game, just for the record. But as someone who born more than 20 years after its release, and thus very much not from its generation, I'll give you my takes on it, okay? So, with all that said, let's get right into it. So, spoiler alert, I have positive opinions on this game. Okay? So, when they first started test developing Breath of the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, before they built its engine and finished doing all of that, they started designing its map out in the engine of the original Legend of Zelda, which I think works really well. It's not just a sentimental anniversary thing, that works really well because Breath of the Wild is trying to be an open world game, and people at the time were like, whoa, it's the first open world Zelda, but here's a secret. The Legend of Zelda 1986 was the original open world game. So you're testing a 3D world, so essentially you're designing the map for a free open world game in the engine of a 2D open world game. The idea makes quite a lot of sense, albeit they are very much different types of open world games, due to coming out a good 30 years apart from each other. When you first load up the game, there's that classic thing where it's like you're standing in an empty map, then you go, and then you can go into the door, into the little cave, and then you're like encouraged to go into the cave as it stands out, and then there's the classic phrase, "It's dangerous to go alone. Take this," and you get the sword. I presume that's there as a design thing to make sure everyone's aware they have the sword in some form, as opposed to just being there by default, and many folks would just not think to try and hit the A and B buttons, and thus wouldn't know they have a sword, whereas if they've been told they now have a sword they previously didn't have, they'll test out how to use it. Yeah, this review's going to go quite a lot into game design. But then, after you get the sword, you can go one of three directions from the room you start out in. You can go west, north, or east. You can't go south because you're already at the bottom of the map. And going west is going to lead you into a way you could quite easily end up going if you go north anyway. Same goes if you go east, but the more rooms you go through, the more your options as to where you could go fan out. And again, another thing that makes this, one of the main things that makes this an open world game, is you can go pretty much anywhere you want right from the get-go. You can go to pretty much any corner of the map where you want. You can go anywhere. You could go all the way throughout the Lost Woods, through Faron Woods. You could go up to the top of Death Mountain. You could go onto the around the coast. You could chill around. You could go around Lake Hylia. The possibilities, well, they aren't endless. There's only so much game here. But you can access most of the game's world right from the get-go. There's one area in the northwest of the map that's cut off that you can't access until you get an item from a dungeon, which itself you can only get into if you get another item from another dungeon, which I think exists to make that area relatively late game, just so there's something that's late game content. But on the whole, you're free to go wherever the fuck you want. That's the only case when there's a major roadblock on the overworld that's going to cut off a massive area, unlike in most future Zelda games, and of course RPGs as well. Okay, so this is all okay. I recorded the audio several hours ago, but the editing process is still in the future, so it's not really post-production, but I'm adding this in later, okay? Basically, back when... So I want to elaborate on this point further than I did when I was initially recording this. The fact that you can get to most parts of the map except for one major area at the very start of the game might sound like it hinders the feeling of progression you get, but frankly I disagree with that. One, because again, there is that massive area you can't access till... Well, if you're purposely trying to get to it as fast as possible, you could probably get to it in a couple hours, but realistically, it's the late game area. But on top of that, you over the course of the game, you get several other methods of progression. One, you get more heart containers, which means it means you have more health. It's hard to kill you. That on its own is progression. And remember when I was playing the game a couple of years back, it made me. I was quite desperate to get as many of them as possible because the game is decently challenging, and I was 12. And it's also the case that you get more items. You can both get more items from dungeons, and you can also buy them from shops and discover new shops to sell new items. It's quite a feedback loop. Like, if you want to compare the degree to which Link is armed at the start of the game to the end of the game, go into NSO, NES, go into that, go into the basic version of the Legend of Zelda emulator, look at what you have, then go into the Legend of Zelda SP in it, and see and admire the difference, because it is quite a stark contrast. It's like you get I think it's a more rewarding feeling of progression as well compared to other Zelda games and of course RPGs, because in them you get a way around an arbitrary roadblock that you could probably find another way around if this was real life, and you get to see some new area, whereas this you get a whole new tool that you can use in a versatile range of situations. It's very rewarding, and frankly, it makes me wish that in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, it makes me wish that they give you new runes later on in the game more than this one marginally useful rune you get later game, as well as a couple rune upgrades which you get later in the game. It makes me wish you got totally new runes right later in the game. The degree of progress and empowerment, the degree to which I'll give you that feeling is incredible. I know this because it does that very well in the original Legend of Zelda from 1986. And the same thing applies to the dungeons in terms of the level of openness. You can go there, you can go to them in any order you want, albeit you can theoretically go into them in any order you want, but here's the thing. One of them you can access immediately, like it's in the part of the map you can access immediately, but you need a special item to get through it. Two of them you need special items you only get later to open them up. And then, of course, there's multiple dungeons in the region of the map you can't access till the late game. So, in practice, you can't do them in any order you want. But there is 3 different early dungeons, and you could start out with any of them. And this is in spite of the fact that the dungeons are given a number, are all just named numerically, levels 1 through 9. But in practice, it's really not that linear. You have 3 could start out with, and of course, as you could progress through the game and get more and more items, you could really do them in a whole bunch of different orders, if not literally any possible order. And another thing is that all the various different areas in the game are much more distinct than people like to think. Looking at the footage of this game, it looks very homogeneous. I know this from having seen footage before I played the game. Like, the ground you're walking on is all like this light shade of brown that looks very light shade of brown, palish, tealish. So what's the term I'm looking for? I know I used to have a specific word I used to refer to its color, and I can't refer to it. I mean, I know before I had that word, I just called it skin color. Yeah. I mean, it matches my skin, but not necessarily everyone's. But besides the point, it looks like sand. To an onlooker, I understand how this game looks like a big desert, But I assure you, it's not. Like, the game does uses quite a lot of different techniques to try and code at different areas is looking different ways. For instance, in the starting area, the rocks around the player is not allowed to walk on are green. This combined with the trees does a okayish job of giving the impression that we're in a forest. Obviously, water tiles are used to imply that we're around a watery area. That works in a much more obvious way than in most cases. There's also these stair tiles, which people don't seem to notice very much, but they actually do a pretty good job of implying elevation, especially in the mountainous areas all around the north of the map. Then there's also tree tiles, which are used around the border to like basically represent the areas you're not allowed to walk on, which are used to create an image of a forest. And in Faron Woods, it's just a generic forest. But then if you go on around to but if you go to the southwest instead of the southeast, then you get brown trees. And it's like a spooky forest, like the Lost Woods, as it's called in later games. Like, there's this shocking amount of different diverse areas that feel, like, creatively distinct from each other. More so than a lot of people give the game credit for. It's really cool. And that's only a taste of it. I'm not going to tell you all of them, just because I don't want to spoil it. But, yeah. The game is not a big desert. Oh, also, in various different areas, the actual layout of the map is changed to accommodate what the area looks like. Again, this is, for instance, in mountain areas or in this one canyon area between the coast and the Faron Woods. There's a bit of a canyon area, and that's also a good example of the level design being used to convey the geography of an area. Okay, so this is another point I thought of after the fact that I'm adding in later. So first of all, a side note, why did I say invade the geography of an area? I have no idea what word I was thinking of and meant to say or whatever. Illustrate. I'll put that there. Yeah, that's what I meant. Anyway, that's what I'm wishing to say here. One also might think that the game is rated homogeneous, just a bunch of empty rooms with just bokoblins in them, and occasionally you see the same shop with the same things in it, but no, there's a lot of stuff to find. 1, secrets. 2, dungeons are hidden in all kinds of places. And it's like, you get secrets from bombing walls and burning trees, famously enough, but also from pushing rocks if you have the power brace. Also, there are different shops that sell tons of different things. It's really complex, actually. You get rooms of secrets, there's casinos. There's just this random area where I use a sprite for the entrance to a dungeon, and it just leads to a casino and it's the only one you can get to without bombing. I don't want to spoil too much, but yeah, there's a lot of actually interesting stuff worth searching for out in this open world, okay? And now I'm done talking about the overall design of the overworld, I'm going to talk about the dungeons now. Yes, I talked about them before, but I was talking about them more as a part of the overworld and as their own thing. And now I'm going to talk about them as their own thing, and yes, they are very much their own thing. They get their own separate map, it's done a separate style, each dungeon has its own separate map, they have a separate theme that plays opposed to the overworld. I think they're part of the game that warrants its own section, alright? So, people often when reviewing Breath of the Wild, they'd make fun of its dungeons, the Divine Beast, and they'd be like, haha, the original Zelda had more than twice as many dungeons as this, 9, and they were all more diverse than this, and that they all had different colors on them. And I think there's several problems with that criticism. One, it's a bit underrated. There's different elements that are associated with the Divine Beasts in Breath of the Wild, as well as they're based on various different animals on top of that. They all have a bit of their own aesthetic, albeit, yes, they are very samey. But on top of that, it undersells just how diverse the original Legend of Zelda's dungeons are. On face value, they're all different colors, but here's the thing. Take the second dungeon. You finally walk up to it. It's at the top of a big hill, and you see it. I'm from outside, and it's like this weird snake statue coming out of the ground, like it's a snake head. Then you walk in, and you find the dungeon's full of snakes. Then if you look at the map of the dungeon, oh, look! The dungeon is in the shape of a snake with the little thing that indicates what room is the final room of the dungeon being the eye. Oh, so yeah, that's a thing the game does quite a lot. That it's very hard to notice at first glance, but quite often it indicates the theme of the dungeon with the shape of the dungeon's map. I'm pretty sure I mentioned that the snake dungeon I was talking about there is full of snakes. It is full of snakes. It also does with the first dungeon. On the outside, it's a dead tree. On the inside, it's in the shape of a dead tree, etc. Which leads me into talk about dungeon number 3 and its shape.
So, when I walked into the third dungeon, well, when you first walk into a dungeon, you aren't given a map of it at first, but once I got the map inside the dungeon, well, I have it up on screen here, but its shape was rather, striking. Yeah, that's a swastika. Yeah, it kind of was a bit of a shock, which there's a lot I could say about that, but in short, that has historically been used all over the world by a bunch of different cultures. From what I understand, From what I understand, it's understood to have different connotations in Japan, particularly way back then. But yeah, yeah, that came out of nowhere, and for what it's worth, I do think the presence of like going in and seeing the dungeon shape as being something that is both so immediately recognizable and so shocking did very much get me to pay attention to dungeon shapes more, which again is a lot of how this game codes the theming of the different dungeons. But yeah, I think that's all that has to be said about that.
And moving on from the aesthetics of the dungeons into their design, it's a very, very simple early dungeon design. You walk in, you walk around different rooms. There's often locked doors. Sometimes you use your feet to open them. You have to kill every enemy in the room. Sometimes you need to get a key to unlock the door. Every dungeon has a special item hidden in it. Some are necessary for plot progression, some are not. But yeah, well, not plot progression, but like, gameplay progression. As I was talking about earlier, it's an item you need to get from a dungeon to access the northwestern quadrant of the map. You know, that's how that whole thing goes. It's there, it happens. But yeah, there's a boss at the end of each dungeon. They're more so because they're bosses from a 1980s video game. They aren't that like complicated or long to beat. They don't have multiple phases or anything. There isn't even like a dedicated attack and defense phase that was first pioneered by Super Mario Bros. 3 that was like a year after this. So yeah, they're more so just about figuring out what the fuck you need to do to defeat them than anything else. And now moving on to my discussion of criticisms of the game. Now, I think a lot of these are pretty bad faith, but I will address them. One of them, and I think the worst one, is that the game is too cryptic. And I wanted to test this when I first played in 2019, and so I specifically made a point of not looking up anything and trying to beat the game, and I wasn't able to fully commit to that. I had to Google a couple, like 2 or 3 things to beat the game, as well as I've been spoiled in 2 or 3 things I might well have had to look up otherwise. But there's only 2 or 3 cases where I think the game is just too cryptic. The first one is the case of the 7th dungeon. To get into it, you need to play a warp whistle in this room with this lake, and then it makes the lake drain. And yeah, then there's also inside that dungeon, there's a bokoblin, and and it's blocking your path, and the only way to get it to stop is by giving it meat. Otherwise, you just can't get past that room. You shall not pass, and all that. That's that meme. But yeah, then there's also the case of the Dongos, figuring out the mechanics of how they work and how to kill them. I could see that confusing some folks. Basically, you just place bombs in their mouth. You can also place bombs by their side, but if you don't have maxed out bombs, you can't do that to kill them. And as well as that, that's all the cases, and as well as it's also the case that you also have to bomb random walls and you have to burn random trees to get into some hidden areas, which at first glance sounds really cryptic and confusing, and how is anyone going to figure that out? But there's so many of these all around the map that by just doing it randomly, where it just feels right to, you're bound to find some, seeing as the bomb's hitbox is big enough. It's the case that there's just so many of them, and some of them are also in places that just feel right due to the way the map's designed around them. So to act like it's impossible to find these is pretty bad faith. Frank Sengo's largely goes for the difficulty, albeit there are some of the later dungeons probably do go too hard. Mainly level 8 is just the worst with this, albeit it's not the only criminal in this regard, but it's by far the worst. Particularly the blue dark nuts are a pain in the ass. Yeah, a room where you have to kill, 7 blue dark nuts, that's okay, that's unfair, I'll admit. That's unfair unless you're using save states. I will not deny, straight up. But other than a couple instances like that, it's not that hard. Frankly, I think a lot of these criticisms, both about the game being too cryptic and about the game being too hard, come from people who were playing it in like the late 2000s and early 2010s, being like, this is a game from the 80s, and retro games always are really short, and going back to play it, just for historical purposes, expecting it to be a quick little romp, but then it's like, it's not that, it's a fully fleshed out game, and so they're getting frustrated they can't just smack it away instantly, but, personally, I miss the days when I was a kid, and being a game, like a fully fleshed out big game that cost $60 and all, I miss the days when doing that, took a couple weeks. When it took a couple weeks till I'd put such a thing down. There's some instances where it's like that, even if that's reliance on the post game, which can be depending on the game, that's varying levels of crime. But it's not that bad. You know, it's perfectly fine. It's like, people think it's bad. Basically, I'm saying that people found it was bad because it defied their expectations of what it would be. You know. That being said, the counter response to this was not exactly any better. Well, these arguments of the game was bad or bad faith. Though, and well, this applies to a lot of old games as well. It's not just Legend of Zelda. Well, the arguments in this case were pretty bad faith. It is also a case that the counter response to it from people that grew up with it was very much just to attack the people who were attacking the thing they liked or who had any criticisms of the thing they liked, even if they weren't necessarily attacking it, going on about them, telling them to get good. Like, toxic PC gamer types who are super, like, hardcore, you should get good, like, play it, like you should be, like, super hardcore, who are, like, basically just gatekeep the label of gamer and video games as a medium. If you do that, you're a cunt. This whole movement was the beginning of what eventually led to Gamergate. It's, not good. Basically, please don't be a cunt. You know, the term get good was invented by developers of Rare back in 1994 to make fun of the exact sort of person who would say it. You know? Like, toxic gamer types I'm not gonna let you get off scot-free. You guys were also kind of being cunts here, to be blunt. But now I'm talking about a controversy from 15 years ago, and it's a pretty dead discussion nowadays. This whole thing, or 12, 15 years ago, I don't know, but yeah. In conclusion, The Legend of Zelda isn't this super impossibly hard and cryptic mess of a game from the early days. It's actually really good. In fact, it's the first example of an open world game. It takes quite a while to beat. That's not because of padding. It actually has quite a lot of meat on its bones, and that's not even considering the second quest exists. It's designed pretty well, albeit it is not without its holes. But yeah, that's my opinions on The Legend of Zelda. This is now a 20-minute long video. I'm gonna wrap it up here.
So, yeah, that was a video. It's ended up coming out a couple days late, and as such, as I've gradually worked it to completion, I've come to hate it increasingly more, but before that, I thought it was a pretty good video. I had a lot to say in it. It was a pretty good thesis, all of it pretty good. But yeah, now I want to release another video in only a couple days from now. I've just released this, and so that could be a headache, but I'm glad to finally have this off my back at least. I do know I initially intended to have music from the game on in the background. That's honestly made me procrastinate on this more. I'm not doing that, but yeah, no, I kind of. Now it's like but like I intend to have game music running in the background as I talked about it, and yeah, that's not happening. And I wish it was, because it would have been so cool, and I related so much over that. But yeah, at this point I just need to get this damn project over with and move on to the next thing. You know, it's already the case that I'm on the weekend, which is when I do a lot of work on videos, considering just the whole school week thing. So yeah. I'm glad to have finished this. But yeah, on the whole, it's a pretty good video, I'd say. Like, it's too much wrong with it. It is a good 20 minutes of content, and yeah. Another thing that's happened is that in recent videos I've taken to just recording footage of the Switch just using its own camera feature and transferring it to a smart device. I talked about this in the like secret outro of the Scarvio review, but it can be a pain in the ass, albeit I'm getting more used to it now. It's a whole thing. But yeah, in this video, I did initially want to try just filming the screen, simply because of the fact that basically, it's in SO, which is the thing I'm filming it on, like in the NSO and NES games thing, it has this border, and two, it puts this little profile picture in the corner, which is unfortunate because it's obviously like the game was not made for 4x3 modern screens. It was made for a cathode ray TV. So yeah. That didn't come out looking the best, but it ended up working, and again, throwing shit to the wind there is kind of important for getting this done, so yeah. Like if you want to see more video. Hey, hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it pushes my videos. I'd greatly appreciate it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Yada yada. Goodbye.